Okay, hello. Let me start in a second. Let me prepare the PowerPoint. Okay, here we go. PowerPoint. That's right. Okay. Okay. Thank you for attending tonight's webinar. That's going to be on simultaneous interpretation strategies, part 2. And why is that? Because last month, we organized another conference that was part 1. So we hope you enjoyed it. These recordings can be found on our Facebook page. Also, tonight, I'm going to be explaining some other strategies that can be used while interpreting, and also try to illustrate the strategies by using single track and dual track recordings. Now, before we start, I would like to thank the interpreters that are translating this talk, 3 former students of mine, Natalia, Laura, and Maria Jose, that I'm sure they are going to do an excellent job in conveying my message into Spanish. Now, there's a reason why I'm addressing my talk in English, which is my B language. And that is, you know why? Because there are so many people joining us who do not understand Spanish. However, for the purposes of illustrating some of the strategies that I'm going to show you, I'm going to be using Spanish in the dual track examples. Okay, first and foremost, let me tell you the following. All of the examples that I'm discussing tonight can be found in the dual track recording that I just copied in the chat box. Okay, that was recorded live in a private market conference here in Buenos Aires with the BBC, which is a public domain, of course. Now, I always give a dual track recording when students can use to elicit some of the examples, demonstrating the strategies, especially if they have the 1-hour track, gives them more context to see where and how I was navigating the sentences and how difficult it was to interpret the speaker. Okay. Let me see. Last time I gave you another link that, let me see if I can copy this. This was the link. It was a dual track on whatchamacallit, on geology. It was a conference on geology that was kind of tough. It had a lot of terminology. So for those of you that did not join us in the first session last month, you can also click on the link later on after the webinar, and I'm sure that you can find some examples of strategies that are used. Okay, so I suggest using always a headphone so you can hear the floor and the interpretation, right and left in separate channels. The tracks could contain some mistakes. Obviously, mistakes I make, since the information may have either been difficult at times or dense, or it may have overwhelmed the interpreter's memory. Okay. Anyways, it is for you to have something that is real private market, like a real private market conference. And I'm sure that despite some of the mistakes that can be found, that you're going to find it useful, and you're going to see some of the expressions that we use when push comes to shove. Okay. I see some of my Spanish students from Europe that have signed up for this session, and I know that it's way too late to be awake at this time. And also many court interpreters and medical interpreters that have joined us from the United States. For you, that you're all professional interpreters living abroad, while listening to the dual track recordings later, probably you can benefit from listening to a native Spanish speaker using his A language terminology, commonly used in conferences in a private market such as Argentina. Okay, so I'm sure that you're going to get a lot of terminology out of that. As a matter of fact, we're organizing a refresher course. In fact, we're organizing several courses that could be found if you refer to interprete.com.ar. Remember that is always .ar because it's Argentina. And there's one especially targeted to court and medical interpreters that would like to become conference interpreters in the future. Okay, so we're starting these classes in March. However, there are some that are starting right now in January 4th, I believe. That is, for example, the high intensity summer classes that we're holding during the summertime in Argentina. You can refer to our website for more information. Now, questions. If your question was not answered during the live event, okay, we plan to get back to you within the next day, probably 2 days. That's why we want you to use the Q&A and not the chat. As a matter of fact, we have disabled the chat box for asking questions because it's very disorganized, okay? I'll try to take those questions at the end of my presentation. You can access the recording also of this live event in our Facebook page. You have the link in the chat box. So please feel free to pass this material along to colleagues who may be interested in advanced simultaneous interpretation skills. Now, let me review some of the basics of strategies and why we use them before we start, okay? For those of you that were not here during the first webinar, we discussed some of the basics and the theory behind strategies, okay? Strategies are used intentional, or they are sometimes goal-oriented procedures that we, the interpreters, use them to solve or prevent problems in simultaneous interpreting, or consecutive as well. The demanding working conditions of the interpreter, especially on remote simultaneous interpreting these days, require us to adopt all sorts of strategies so we can interpret and translate successfully, especially with event organizers and speakers cramming so much in just a few minutes. So what are the constraints that we have? High time pressure, fast delivery, high information density. We may have unfamiliar topics. This may drive our available processing capacity to the point of saturation, thus causing problems. Additionally, the interpreter's knowledge gap may also pose other problems. So in order to solve or prevent those problems, we need to adopt strategies, okay? Now, strategies are used either consciously or unconsciously. However, after successful repeated use, they may become unconscious and automatic to the professional interpreters. It is then that they reduce the cognitive load, because only if strategies are activated automatically will the interpreter overcome his or her capacity limitations. And that's when we start making the best use of available processing capacity. Some of them are knowledge-based and some of them are skill-based, okay? And I'm sure that you can refer to some of the expert performance that is more automated and unconscious than that of junior interpreters or people who are just starting to interpret these days. There's a study conducted by Barbara Moser. It's Barbara Moser-Mercer, 1997. I'm sure that you can read that paper online, okay? Now, why do we need to master strategies? And also, are these strategies teachable? Weishibu Wan, that's something in Chinese, says better late than never, because when I studied interpretation back in the 90s, this was not taught. The multitasking nature of interpreting then imposes several cognitive demands, and these constraints force the interpreters to engage in competitive activities. The factors may cause comprehension and production difficulties that we may have during the conference. For example, the high time pressure, division of attention, also the extreme speech conditions, syntactic complexity, non-native speakers with strong accents, and many things that we have seen in conferences, and that's why we resort to these strategies. So, you know, right now with RSI, people are cramming too much. That's why we have this this poster that went viral just a few days ago. Now, we as interpreters may have limited working memory capacity, deficient linguistic abilities, and even insufficient extra linguistic knowledge. Because of this, the interpreter may not be able to produce the high quality target speech that we intend to deliver, okay? So to cope with problems encountered, the interpreter has to allocate his or her available processing capacity strategically during the comprehension of the source speech, okay? The production of the target speech, and also the monitoring of output. Those strategies can therefore be categorized into comprehension strategies, production strategies, and monitoring or global strategies, okay? The use of strategies needs to be automatic so as to save cognitive capacity for complex operations. Now, the problem is that although some strategies violate the principle of faithfulness in interpreting, strategies help us use a minimum amount of processing effort for maximum meaning delivery, and they can ease cognitive strain. So what else? They can overcome emergencies. And that is why researchers argue that interpreters resort to a number of strategies that we're going to analyze today that may ease the burden and improve the pace of delivery, okay? Now, generally, interpreters use what is called load reduction strategies to avoid accumulation of untranslated information so that their memory and processing capacity will not be overloaded. Now, let's see. Some interpreting strategies are present in monolingual communication. For example, we prepare, also inference, also waiting or stalling, while others are more specific to interpreting. Like, for example, anticipation, compression, addition, omission, change in order, all those strategies that we saw in the past seminar. More than one strategy can be applied at a certain point in interpreting. So as we will see in some of the dual track recordings that I have prepared for today, sometimes we use like 2 at a time. For example, the use of chunking or segmentation is often associated with anticipation, also with waiting, with stalling. The same goes for coping with source text complexity or coping even with speech structure. However, there are disadvantages. The use of strategies may result in potential information loss, also credibility loss, or time or processing capacity cost, as it is widely discussed in research done over the last years, okay? For example, the use of omission and compression may lead us to lose some information. The frequent use of repair may harm our credibility in a conference. The use of waiting means loss of time. And then we keep storing information in memory and thus temporarily increases our cognitive load, okay? By the way, literature does not make a difference between strategy or tactics. And sometimes, they are used interchangeably. Now, the most commonly used strategies, and that's what we saw in the past seminar, were summarization, compression, condensing, omission, deletion, and anticipation, okay? Now, people are always asking if these strategies are teachable. And coping tactics are an essential practical skill in interpretation. Basically, they're taught within the framework of practical exercises. In most training programs, this is done by trial and correction, with trial on the student's part and corrections from the instructors, okay? Such corrections are generally normative in nature. Now, instructors sometimes refer to the communication impact of the tactics in order to explain their preferences. But we teachers are not necessarily aware of other factors which influence these strategies because seldom have these instructors read theory or do research on them, okay? So my presentation attempts to provide instructors or practitioners in the industry or even the students that are here joining us in this webinar with a list of basic coping tactics. I am presenting, therefore, a conceptual framework which describes the advantages and the disadvantages, drawbacks of each strategy. And then we are going to discuss a few rules which may help explain what interpreters prefer. Now, in simultaneous interpretation, we are at the mercy of the speaker, and we must learn to construct his sentences with flexibility, especially when interpreting from and into languages with different syntax. We must also be prepared to handle heavy or dense speeches, to change the order of sentences, to cut sometimes to chunk sentences into several short ones, and even find vague expressions and padding to overcome the usual difficulties. That is, while you're waiting for the speaker to clarify something that is incomprehensible. There's a Chinese proverb that says, all things are difficult before they're easy. I love the Chinese proverbs. I'm going to mention quite a few. As you know, I live in 3 months of the year in Shanghai, so I'm kind of overexposed to some of the Chinese proverbs. Strategies are sometimes intertwined, since one strategy can lead you to apply another. Now, let's go to the practical part of this presentation, because I don't want to bore you with the theory. So here we're going to see how to employ the strategies. And by way of example, I will be using dual tracks for dual track recordings with the corresponding translation into my A language, okay? These recordings come from live events. And that is why we are going to see exactly some of the delays, the clash, the anticipation, some inference, repair strategies. And I wish I could provide you with more examples, but it has been time consuming to go over many recordings. Luckily, most of the recordings that I have are in dual track, so it gives me the possibility to analyze in real time what happened during the conference, and that is great. It's great for students. Okay. We're going to start with the first strategy of today. Remember that we cover anticipation, compression, and non-repair and other strategies in the previous webinar. Right now, I'm going to be covering some morphosyntactic transformation and additions. Okay. Let's see. This is a recording that is live. It's a conference speaker from the BBC that came to Argentina some 3-4 years ago. Okay. And it's the recording that the link that I copy in the chat box. So we're going to hear from the marketing manager, I believe, of the BBC, for a person that was very involved with social media and how to improve the communication within the BBC, okay? So she was training journalists, and she was very, very practical in everything she said. She was very clear, an A language, native speaker, very, very correct, perfect English. However, some of the excerpts that we're going to see may pose a challenge in simultaneous interpretation, okay? We're going to analyze this first part from the point of view of Spanish. For those of you that are not acquainted with Spanish, I will try to explain more or less what happened. Okay, so this is the floor. Anyone like this?
And I set my team these guiding principles for 2017. I said I want us to be mobile and social first. Think about, does our content work on mobile? And does it work on social media? Think about that first before anything else. Secondly, if we can make it work across television and the web, we want that to happen too.
Okay. Here we're going to see how the interpreter departs from the surface structure of the original language and expresses the meaning using different syntactic constructions from those of the original, okay? It could be conversion of negative clauses into affirmative clauses, for example, subordinate clauses into main clauses or main sentences, and of verb phrases into noun phrases. And this is usually the typical syntactic transformation that we see. In this case, what poses a problem here is something different, is the word mobile, social media, things like that. We're going to analyze it, and you're going to see how basically the interpreters are, or in this case, it was me, how I navigate the sentences, okay? Here's the translation.
And I set my team these guiding
Armé
principles for
mi equipo en base a
2017.
estos principios
I said I
del
want us to be
2017. Y
mobile
los
and
lineamientos
social
eran,
first.
primero,
Think about,
concentrarnos en
does
lo
our
móvil
content work
y en
on
las redes
mobile?
sociales, a ver si
And
el
does it
contenido
work on
funciona en los
social
celulares
media?
y en las
Think
redes
about
sociales
that
a la vez.
first before anything
Primero,
else.
esta va a ser la prioridad ante
Secondly,
que
If we
nada.
can make it
En
work
segundo
across
lugar,
television,
si puede funcionar
and
en
the web,
televisión y en la web,
we want that to happen
queremos
too.
que esto también.
Okay, and so what poses the problem here is like the word mobile, and when she says social, and she doesn't say social media, and she doesn't say mobile phones. So for example, in my language, I cannot say móviles or mobile, probably móviles, yes, in the plural form. En lo social, if I say en lo social, it's like probably in societies, it's like not really clear. So mobile and social were translated as en celulares y en redes sociales. One technique that we usually apply in Spanish when we see a word like mobile is we use en lo o en los celulares, en lo móvil, okay? Like the concept. And here it is not enough. It requires to add some words. And this basically takes us to the next example, that is text expansion and additions. And here, what happens is the interpreter adds something that is absent in the source text, such as discourse markers, connectives, maybe rhetorical phrases as well, so that the target text sounds are like, or the target sounds like more logical and coherent for the audience, okay? And here, this is what happened. This was the original. Why don't you take a moment, try to read this before I give you the context of what she said. I'm gonna drink some water because it's going to be a long talk. And in red, I highlighted some of the pitfalls. It's like the context is there. We can tell that there's an election. So we need to be very, very careful in the way we retell that or we relay that into the target language. Okay, let's see what happens and the way she says this.
When it would come in, a result would come in, and it would give you, after every result, a running total of how the evening was going and what the prediction.
Okay. Here, imagine, oh no, I need to.
Was and who had won what seats. And then, of course, the final result, which we turned into a GIF. And this was shared thousands and thousands and thousands of times. We made one for Hillary as well, I should add, but we never used it.
Okay, this was the translation.
Ejemplo de que cuando venían los resultados de Hillary, les daba también un total de cómo rankeaba durante la noche, cuál era la predicción, el pronóstico y quién había ganado qué banca en el Senado. Y luego el resultado final, obviamente, que lo convertimos en un GIF animado, que se compartió miles y miles y miles de veces. Hicimos uno también para Hillary, pero nunca lo pudimos.
Now, as you can see, the result was a result of the presidential elections, okay? The total was the counting of presidential votes. How the evening was going, I cannot say como estaba pasando la noche. It doesn't make any sense. So whenever I give my students this recording, I hear translations like how Hillary was having a good time or things like that. The evening, when you say noche in Spanish and it's not related to the elections at all, poses a few problems. There's a word in Spanish that was used here that comes out very, very handy, that is ranqueada, okay? It's like how basically how the evening was going, como rankeaba, okay, in the election, which gives the audience a clear idea of how the evening was going. And then the seats are bancas en el Senado, that was the addition. For example, they gain, I don't know, an X number of seats in the Senate. Now, the worst mistake is to be stuck right in the middle here with words like asientos that not only do not convey the idea of elections, but also may be misleading for the audience, and they will think of other contexts. Then GEF. The problem with that word is that it's so short in English that even if I transliterate that into Spanish as GEF, okay, it may not be understood in Spanish, as probably people are acquainted here with the word gift. That has nothing to do with this context, okay? So the translation went on as animated GIF, GIF animado. And then you have another one, it says made one. Hicimos uno and not una because it was the animated GIF, because the reference is animated GIF there, which is not gender neutral, in this case in Spanish, okay? So when we interpret simultaneously, interpreters probably are not aware of the process that goes on when it comes to repairing, adding words. It is, in my opinion, one of the most difficult strategies to be applied by students of interpretation, since they tend to translate word for word, okay? So like they don't have any problems with omissions or compression sometimes, but they do have, like this strategy poses a huge problem for them, like adding and collocating the words so they're not literal. Next example. The next example is paraphrasing, explaining, and localizing. Here, the interpreter is not going to be able to find an appropriate equivalent for one segment of the source and explains the intended meaning of the original segment, okay? Let's see what happens. This was the original. You're gonna find another word there that says boats that really they did not come in boats, okay? They were on board something different. So let's see how she says this.
We also did some traditional mapping. These are the locations of all the boats, the migrant accidents, and these are the cemeteries with unmarked graves all around Turkey and Greece and Italy, and particularly on Sicily.
Okay, she's talking about the migrants. Let's see what happens. It's all over the news these days. Translation.
Realmente de esta manera explica a través del dron la historia. Luego el mapeo, las balsas donde tuvieron accidentes, los migrantes y los cementerios con las tumbas en NN en Turquía, Grecia, Italia y especialmente en Sicilia.
Okay. The interpreter knows that we cannot use words like bote or, well, bote is not that bad, but lancha, for example, like it's like a speedboat. So the best choice here is balsa, which would have been very easy if she had said the word raft. Like, for example, migrant rafts in the Mediterranean, but she didn't say raft, okay? Then there's another problem with the unmarked graves. Like, for example, the literal translation, like tumbas no marcadas, probably can be understood in other countries. However, I used in this case an acronym that I do not know if you heard it, since it went really quick. It was NN, okay? Double N, okay? NN, it means no name. NN, or the double N, is marked when a grave of an unknown person. So why localizing it here as NN here in Argentina? Okay. The Argentine forensic anthropology team here, for example, right now they say that they're still struggling to identify the remains of around 600 bodies dating back to the years of the military dictatorship in Argentina that went back from 1976 to 1983 approximately. It has called on relatives on the disappeared to come forward and provide blood samples to aid the efforts, okay? So many of them were tagged as NN, no name. So it was a very good way of referring to the unmarked graves, and I knew if I localize it in this way, it could be easily understood. It was short, it was quick, and it was perfectly understood by the audience here, okay? I don't know, again, I don't know how, if I could use that translation in other countries like Mexico or Colombia, for example. Another one, here, we're going to see the way she refers to some services in the BBC. She even mentions unmarked graves once again. So let's see how she pronounces the word mundo, okay?
Our colleagues in the World Service who work in English all over the world, but also in 42 other different languages, including Spanish, BBC Mundo. We realized that the migrant story of all the migrants coming to Europe, we knew a lot about the people that had died and been found. We knew a lot about the people who had survived and come to Europe, but there was a whole category that nobody knew anything about, which was the people who were missing and the people who were buried in unmarked graves all around the Mediterranean. And we have...
Okay, so here we use another technique that is called inference. So it's when the interpreter recovers some of the information that is forgotten, maybe forgotten, not comprehended, or not heard by relying on the source speech context. And in this case, one's general knowledge, okay? In this case was basically the word mundo there. Let's see, translation.
Por ejemplo, cuando trabajábamos con los colegas en el servicio mundial que trabajan en inglés en todo el mundo y también en 42 idiomas, incluso el español, que se llama BBC Mundo, nos dimos cuenta que las historias de los migrantes que llegan a Europa, sí, se mostraba la gente que moría, que se había encontrado, los que habían sobrevivido, habían arribado a Europa, pero había una categoría totalmente desconocida, que eran aquellos que estaban desaparecidos y aquellos que estaban en tumbas desconocidas que no tenían.
Okay, and as you can see, I go back to tumbas desconocidas, or well, the translation went on like y que no tenían nombre, okay? So it was another way of explaining and adding more context or paraphrasing, just to see if, you know, if the audience was not able to pick NN. That was the translation of the previous segment, okay? Now, we're going to see another technique that interpreters use all the time that is called reproduction. Reproduction is something different. It's like when the interpreter is unable to translate an unknown term, okay, in the original and leaves it in the target discourse as it appears in the original, okay? So basically what happens is this. For example, the word data picks didn't mean anything here. So I wouldn't dare to say X de datos in Spanish. Made no sense.
This is another automated content that we can do. We call them data picks. Very simple for a journalist to make. You simply choose a picture, you research the up to five facts that you can insert on the left-hand side, and choose a color, and that's it. And that can be done by a journalist as quickly as it takes you to find out.
Okay, translation.
This is another automated
Acá tenemos otro contenido automatizado que hacemos, se llama Data Picks. Es muy fácil para el periodista. Uno elige una foto, pone 5 hechos que los inserta en el margen izquierdo y optan por un color, y así de fácil se hace. Esto lo hace cualquier tipo de periodista.
Okay, as you can see, in this case, we use reproduction because it didn't make any sense to translate the word data picks. Okay, so I left it as English and pray that the journalists in the audience would understand it in that way. Okay, we're going to see the next one, that is world knowledge. We saw some of the strategies related to world knowledge in the previous seminar. Usually resorting to world knowledge is when the interpreter connects the message of the original speech with his or her own knowledge on a given field, for example, in engineering, oil and gas, okay, in the medical field, okay, if you know a lot about medical terminology. So let's see what happens.
And you have to use a statistical tool, kind of thing called Euclidean distance. And it kind of does that 3D mapping against 3 variables. It's way beyond me, but it worked. And
okay, so that was tough because it was a proper name, okay? She said this.
And you have to use a statistical tool, kind of thing called Euclidean distance. And it kind of does that 3D mapping against 3 variables. It's way beyond me, but it worked. And
now, did I use world knowledge? No, I didn't. Okay. I could have used it if I had known who Euclid was. But let's see what happened in the translation.
No era una línea o 2 líneas, eran 3 que se interseccionaban y una herramienta estadística que se llamaba distancia euclidiana, que hacía el mapeo de las 3 variables y básicamente me sobrepasa.
Okay, so as you can see, the translation was okay, was Euclidiano, okay? Now, if you refer to history, Euclid, sometimes called Euclid of Alexandria, to distinguish him from Euclid of Megara. By the way, I had no idea that there were 2 Euclids, not even the Euclid of Alexandria, let alone the Euclid of Megara, but was a Greek mathematician, often referred to as the founder of geometry. Okay, his elements, for example, Wikipedia says that his elements are one of the most influential works in the history of mathematics, serving as the main textbook for teaching mathematics, especially geometry, from the time of its publications until the 19th or even early 20th century. In mathematics, the Euclidean distance, later on I tried to look it up, was the distance between 2 points. And that is the length of a line segment between the 2 points, okay? And it was calculated from the Cartesian coordinates of the points using the Pythagorean theorem, therefore occasionally being called Pythagorean distance. So I had no idea, and in this case, I did not use world knowledge. I guess the word, I could tell it was a proper name. I just added the suffix. And if you're confident enough, it was going to correct the interpreter, right? Now, there's a saying that goes, all you need, oh, what happened with my connection here? Hang on a second. Let's see if I can fix this. Okay, good. Okay, there's a saying that goes, all you need in life is ignorance and confidence, and then success is sure. So confidence comes not from always being right, but from not fearing to be wrong, okay? Now, let's go to the next strategy that is called repair. The interpreter makes corrections when, for example, he finds distortions of the original meaning intended in her or his interpreting, and realizes a better way of expressing what has been said, or detects sometimes contradictions between the way we anticipate the incoming discourse and what it actually is, okay? So we're gonna see what happened here.
To simultaneously create a graphic, an image that we could tweet out at the same time as creating the graphic for TV. This is very good value for money, but it also meant a whole new audience on Twitter where to simultaneously create a graphic, an image.
Okay, let's see the solution. The problem was the word graphic. As a matter of fact, when you see that post modifier of what comes after graphic, that is for TV, I realized that the translation was not graphic, okay? The word that we should use is something totally different that is used in streaming, in video productions, and even on television. Let's see what the word is in Spanish.
To simultaneously create a graphic,
para crear una imagen simultánea que podíamos enviar por Twitter a la vez que creamos esta imagen o esta placa para televisión. Realmente le sacamos mucho provecho y también...
So as you can see, the word was placa. That's the way we use when we have a slide, okay, that is fixed. And on television or in streaming, okay? And we do things in the background, so nobody notices. We're going to see the other strategy that is called transcoding or calc. Now here, we use it when the interpreters are unable to grasp the overall meaning of the original, and they decide to use word-for-word approach by sticking to the surface structure of the floor of the original language, okay? Let's see the example. For example, here it says the personal relevance calculator, okay? It makes no sense. We don't know, even if you Google that, I don't think that you can find what the personal relevance calculator is.
And we call it the personal relevance calculator. And what this means is you just put in a very small amount of information about yourself and you get a result back that's personal just to you. And you can do this by manipulating a very big data set. We work with a lot of universities and academics as well as other big organizations who might be doing interesting research.
Okay. So the personal relevance calculator makes no sense. Basically, I will show you the translation right now. I have to use the word-for-word approach here to see where it takes me, okay? Because I have to say something. Let's see.
que lleva más tiempo, más exitoso y que lleva más tiempo. Se llama la calculadora de relevancia personal. Uno le integra información o le incorpora información de uno y obtiene un resultado con el cual se puede identificar. Lo puede hacer con un conjunto de datos, con una base de datos provenientes de universidades, sector académico u otras organizaciones donde tal vez hacen una investigación interesante.
Okay, let's see the next one. The next one is décalage plus addition. Okay, so remember that I said that there are sometimes strategies that are intertwined or one follows the other one, okay? So with décalage, the interpreter manages the available processing capacity by extending or narrowing the ear voice span as to devote more effort to listening. And that we pay attention to what is coming. It's used especially when there are strong accents or when there's a word like class that has many, many meanings. Okay, let's see what happened here.
And this was so far our most successful one. It's about class. You know, we British people are very obsessed with class. We've always had 3 classes, lower, middle, and upper. But a group of academics got together from the University of Oxford and decided that the 3 classes were not enough anymore. Society was more complicated.
Okay, so imagine that the first time that she says class, I don't know if she's talking about classes, education, e-learning, okay? So I cannot translate aulas, clase, well, classes, yes, but not something related to education. So you can see that the clash and the stalling, okay? And then some addition. And the word that we use probably in Spanish to explain this better is social class. Let's see.
And this was so far our most successful one.
Y este es el más exitoso. Sobre las clases, los británicos están obsesionados con las clases sociales. Siempre teníamos 3. Clase baja, media y clase alta. Sin embargo, se juntaron algunos académicos en la Universidad de Oxford y decidieron que las 3 clases no bastaban, que la sociedad en realidad era más abarcativa.
Okay, as you can see, class in Spanish needs to be used here with the word social, clase social, to be fully understood, okay? As a matter of fact, there's a Chinese, my students sometimes find it hard to wait and they want to get rid of the structure and they end up transliterating or changing the meaning of things. There's a Chinese saying that goes like this: a little impatience, they say, will spoil great plans, okay? So make sure that in this case, you wait. Otherwise, you're going to make a mistake meaning, okay? You're going to change the meaning of a sentence. Also, other challenge that we're faced with is basically the imperial versus the metric system. And I'm not saying that we have to change that because it would be impossible to convert all units. However, in some of the occasions, some cases, we do need to make the conversions, and that is in real time, okay? And it's hard. I've heard, for example, the way she says that, you're going to notice that there are 2 conversions that have to be done in the same paragraph, okay? And that is even followed by a date, 1963, that overwhelms the interpreter's memory. So let's see what happens.
So in this instance, we've put in 5'7". It's about my height. 225 pounds, that's a bit heavier than me. And a date of birth, 1963, female. This is the first result you get. It compares.
Translation.
Y veían a qué atleta se asemejaba. esta instancia pusimos 1,70, 1,72, que es la altura. 110 kilos, un poquitito más pesado que yo, y la fecha de nacimiento, que era 1963, una mujer. Este es el primer resultado que obtenemos.
Okay, as you can see, what I decide to convert in simultaneous interpreting are basically everyday measurements. Typically the height of a person, the weight, as in this case. I cannot say pesaba 220 pounds, like 220 libras, because like here, unless they are engineers, they would be confused, okay? So I would be confusing the audience, especially since it's very easy for me because it's just divided by 2, more or less. I think it's 2.2. So sometimes, you know what else I convert? I convert temperature, but not in an engineering conference. Something like when they said 105, it was like 105 degrees that day in Texas. So you say like 40 degrees Celsius in Spanish, hacía como 40 grados de calor, okay? Also feet, sometimes for short distances, like when they say like 3 feet, como un metro, like a meter, okay? Sometimes miles into kilometers approximately, but not the rest, okay? As a matter of fact, if you're unsure about the conversion, you gotta play safe, okay? You cannot risk it. There's a Chinese saying, by the way, that goes like this. It says, better a diamond with a flaw than a pebble without one, okay? Now, final strategy that we're gonna cover today is the pause distribution. I think that we explained this in the previous conference. Pauses start to divide discourse into tone groups and meaning units in the way we communicate. So the interpreter here uses pauses strategically to assess communicating content to the audience. Let's see what happens. Okay, this comes, let me see. Oh, this comes from the previous, I'm sorry that I don't have that, let me see.
Gas is the low end of the hydrocarbon chain. It has 70 to 100% of methane, which is the very simplest combination of carbon and hydrogen, plus some ethane, helium, hydrogen, nitrogen, and CO2.
This is like the carryover from the previous slide deck that we covered last month in the other webinar. Let's see what and the way we use pause distribution here with the dual track recording.
Gas is
El gas, por otro lado,
low end
es el extremo más bajo de la cadena de hidrocarburos. Tienen entre un 70 y un 100% de metano, que en realidad es la combinación más sencilla de carbono e hidrógeno, además de tener etano, helio, hidrógeno, nitrógeno y dióxido de carbono.
Okay, as you can see, the pause distribution is a strategy that serves to divide discourse into tone groups. We use those pauses strategically, and we are assisting communicating content to the audience in a very, very coherent, consistent way, okay? And basically, this is the end of the presentation. I have some other examples, but I won't be able to cover them. So right now, if you have questions, I'll go to the Q&A. And let's see if I can take those questions, okay? Do you have any questions on some of the recordings and some of the strategies that we have covered either today or probably in the previous seminar? There's a question by Antonia says, if the recording is going to be available and if we can record in 2 languages. Yes, we can. Are there any questions? In the previous seminar, we had like 30 questions. Okay. Oh, yes. How do you deal with complex figures, especially when there are several in a short span? Okay, good, Evangelina. It says, how do you deal with complex figures, especially when there are several in a short span? Sometimes we can even adopt compression there. Like, for example, sometimes I said, you range from 10 million to 5 million and then to 2.2 million, okay? So in that case, I would say de 5 millones a 2, or de 10 a 5 y a 2,2, okay? Something like that. And you can omit million, and it's implicit there. Sometimes, especially if you're speaking about accounting, if they're analyzing a financial statement or a balance sheet, in that case, you have very, very complex figures. So you need to refer to the slide. So you refer to the visual aid and you can say, well, if you miss something, as it is clearly shown on the slide or on the screen, okay? Or you just say, well, the current liabilities amount. So you can refer to some of the concepts. You can compress the word million. You can even sometimes omit some of the decimals. We do that, okay? Any other examples or any other questions? Okay, there's another one here. Let's see. What kind of exercise do you practice to learn these strategies? Okay, the way we learn the strategies are, first, you can learn the strategies just by reading a book. So what I do with my students, I select most of the MP3s that I have that they are recorded with a dual track, okay? And so we practice the conference in class, and then they take the time to identify. I don't tell them you have to do this, okay? Well, this is pause distribution. In the forum, basically they take the time to analyze the dual track recording of the instructor, okay? And they take down notes and they try to see, you know, in what ways we navigated the sentences. And then we try to explain some of the theory that is behind the strategy. And then they learn by more or less replicating what the instructor or what that dual track recording has, okay? The content of those strategies. But you cannot read the book that and say, okay, I'm going to apply pause distribution, okay, or omission or anticipation, okay? It's going to be hard. So and that is usually done, these kind of exercises, in the advanced classes. Although right now I'm using this methodology from the very beginning. For example, even in the second year, I am teaching these kind of strategies so students could navigate the sentences more effectively. Okay, if not, they translate word for word and it's going to be useless. Now, oh, there's an echo. Okay. There's another question, says, could you please repeat the first technique? The morpho-syntactic transformation. Yeah, that is when we change elements in the sentence. For example, noun clauses or noun phrases into, like this one. Americans are very critical of the way Chinese do business. I cannot say, los americanos son críticos de la forma en que los chinos hacen negocios. In that case, they are critical of in the word or the verb that we use in Spanish is a direct verb like criticar, okay? But we cannot say somos críticos. So that is a morphosyntactic transformation because I'm translating that phrase into a direct verb. Sometimes with one word, we can translate like a whole set of words or phrases that are used in Spanish. For example, hizo las cosas rápidamente y eficientemente, okay? He did that swiftly and efficiently. He did that, he was expeditious, okay? Expeditiously. So in that way, you're making a transformation, a morphosyntactic transformation, okay, Jorge? Susan says, how do you deal with non-familiar cultural references? Yes, that is very, very difficult, Susan. I find it, you know, as I live in China 3 months of the year, whenever I see something that is related to the Chinese culture, sometimes, and that is, even though, you know, it's in English, and that is translated into Spanish, I said, no, that is not the meaning, okay? Because like I noticed that the interpreter doesn't have the background or the world knowledge to translate that effectively or accurately. But, you know, more or less, that is the translation. Sometimes they cannot even understand a saying or a proverb or, I don't know, meals, the location of cities. Even sometimes some of my students, they find it hard to even reproduce some of the name of cities. For example, I was listening to a professional interpreter at the time, and the floor said, I met you in, or I met the Secretary of State in cities like Hangzhou, Suzhou, and Hong Kong, and Guangzhou. Okay, the only city that was translated accurately was Hong Kong. Okay, she had no idea of the difference between Hangzhou, that is north of Shanghai, and Guangzhou, that is El Canton, and that is next to Hong Kong, and let alone Suzhou. Suzhou is like an hour away, 25 minutes away from Shanghai. So the non-familiar cultural references are always hard for interpreters, especially for students, especially if they do not read, or if sometimes they are not involved with the culture, or if they don't have enough background material in the conference. That is going to cause many problems. So it's always good to travel and to try to read as much as possible. But anyways, cultural references or cultural differences are going to pose challenges in interpretation all the time, okay? John is asking, what is the ideal methodological sequence to teach these strategies in an interpreting program? We start with the easy ones that are anticipation, for example, compression. Let me see. I can tell you more or less if I log in my e-learning platform here. Yes. Okay. Yes. From what I see, the knowledge-based strategies, like the non-linguistic anticipation, inference, resorting to world knowledge, visualization, and personal involvement. Those are the strategies that we use first. Also, we use, then we start teaching chunking, segmentation, Restructuring and changing the order is what we saw as the morpho-syntactic transformation. Transcoding, reproduction is what we saw today. Parallel reformulation, that is very difficult. What else? Compression, it may pose a challenge sometimes. Text expansion is the most difficult one, and additions and elaboration, because those are explanatory additions to maintain coherence, okay? Adaptation also, that's quite a challenge. Neutralization, evasion, what else? Omission, message abandonment, that is when I have no choice but to omit and to continue. I mean, they do it. It's not that they do it. I mean, students make this mistake, but it's not because they do it on purpose. They abandon messages because they're overwhelmed, okay? But to abandon a message on purpose is another strategy, basically. Approximation, that's another one. Paraphrasing is what we saw today. Decalage time with strong accents is, we teach that at the beginning also. Narrowing the ear-voice span, waiting and delaying response, tailing, stalling, okay? Repetition, that when you want to be more clear and more to the point, and you find a word that is more specific. What is difficult is the other strategy, like pause distribution and intonation. Repair, that is self-correction, they can do it. They can do it at the very beginning. I mean, they realize that they are making a mistake and they can self-correct. There's no problem with that. Now, the no repair, the decision for no repair, that's a kind of involuntary. I mean, they see it as message abandonment, okay? But it's not that they are going to see the non-repair strategy as a strategy itself, okay? And monitoring is very, very difficult because they got to work with one ear and they got to monitor and self-monitor constantly. So more or less, John, these were the sequence of the way we teach strategies. Not all interpreting programs are covering the strategies. First, if you don't have a professional interpreter that is teaching the course, I mean, they're not going to be explaining strategies. Probably they are retired, or they don't work any longer, or they work just a few conferences. So I see sometimes that they are not like integrated in or included in the interpreting programs of many schools. And that is a pity, okay? Silvina, how do you manage to interpret descriptions, especially when you have several characteristics of something and that things come at the end? Okay, adjectives are always a challenge, okay? So when you have many adjectives and they're very, very specific to the point, like for example, I don't know, dingy, for example, the word dingy. It's not dirty, okay? It's like dark and dirty at the same time. So by the time I get to that word in Spanish, like we have a word in Spanish for that, that is lúgubre. That is not a very, very common word, okay? I can always generalize it using dark, like oscuro, and sucio, okay? Like the dingy stairs, okay? So that's one way of solving it, but adjectives are always going to pose a problem. Can you provide some tips for developing competency and effectiveness? Hilda, using the strategies, it's not easy. I mean, it's part of a program that is going to take at least a year to develop. I mean, to develop these strategies and to be competent and to feel comfortable using them, okay? And it requires not only the use of strategies, but giving students the right listening material, the right conferences. So that is why when I select some of the materials for the learning program or for the in-person program here in Argentina, what I do is I go directly, not to the single track. I make sure that I listen to the dual track. I want to see what I said here in that conference, and that if that could be tailored to a specific course or a specific level. Okay. Now, John says that has created many exercises for conference interpreter, and he usually starts with creating impromptu speeches, side translation, oral retelling, summarizing, paraphrasing, consecutive. Yeah, these are the basic exercises that one can do, shadowing and foresight and all of that. But another thing is to manage the strategies in fast-paced conferences at 150 words per minute. When you have to make a decision, whether you repair, not repair, and how to handle the intonation. And yeah, then the oral retelling where the side translation is gonna help up to some point, but it's not gonna be of much help if you are not trained, especially with the right material. Okay, so you can, exercises are good. They need to be tailored specifically to the strategies that you want to teach and you want your students to learn. Okay, and that is basically the main objective. Okay, if there are no further questions, oh no, there's another one. It says, Maria says, thank you for all these very useful tips. My question is this: how do you deal with a speaker who keeps making false starts once and again and never completes their ideas? Very, very good. Okay. Let me see. Wait a second. I should have collect these questions that they have been already applied. Okay. So with the false starts, the only thing that you can do, and also she says, and maybe this is off topic, so no problem if you decide not to answer. No, Maria, it's part of a strategy. As a matter of fact, the first thing that you can do is apply decalage, okay? Because the false starts, the false starts are gonna take what? 1-2 seconds, no more than that. You can wait for even 3, 4, 5 seconds. You know the difference between the ear voice pan or how memory retention works in students and with professional interpreters is totally different. For example, my students can retain up to 4, 5, 6, 7 words, depending on the redundancy, obviously, depending if the information is dense as well. Now, interpreters, they have the capacity to have memory retention of up to 12 words, not a problem. Sometimes 14, if there's redundancy. So if you apply decalage, you're gonna get rid of all those false starts. Sometimes what happens is that by stalling, we realize, and obviously you're gonna be waiting with fillers, okay? Like for example, en realidad, actually, things like that, that they do not have any meaning. They're empty carriers of meaning, okay? So, and you're going to somehow try to understand and get the gist of the sentence and try to translate that as accurately as possible. But with the false starts, that is the only thing that you can do, okay? Basically, it's like fall behind. It's like when the same thing that happens when you have a speaker with a strong accent. Sometimes you're going to understand by the way they mentioned like the third or fourth word, and you said, oh, okay, now that I see the word collocation, I can tell that the first word was this one. Okay, but if I don't apply décalage or stalling, there's no way that I can understand word for word what she says or what he says. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, it's 9. Oh, there's another one. Says you have to worry to keep up with the speaker in simultaneous interpreting. Well, yes. But if you apply some of the strategies in redundancy and all of that, it's a way of keeping up with their pace. Okay. Christian says, what do you do when the speaker is dealing with a topic you know about and you detect that he's making a content mistake? Very good. Do you make the mistake with him or what? It happened to me many, many times. You know, remember that when we talk about the meters and the feet, okay, like the other day we had a person, it was an engineering conference, and he said, well, this is like 3 feet, okay? And then he said 6 meters or 9 meters. I said, no. I said 3 feet, 9 meters. So at that time, you know, it was impossible. I knew that he was making a mistake. But the problem was that he even kept making mistakes. He tried to convert. And then luckily it was like a workshop. I said, you don't multiply by 3 divided by 3. And then he says, oh my God, yes, I made that mistake. So in that case, if you're sure that he's making that mistake, basically you're going to say the right translation. But unless he's testing the audience or the students to see if they know that is that happens usually when speakers are testing and they're trying to see how students would react. So you need to be careful with that, okay? Because in that way, basically you are going to be spoiling that kind of test. Okay, if there are no further questions, I would like to conclude this webinar. It's been great having you here, and hopefully we're going to see each other in another webinar next year. Okay, probably we're going to organize another one by February or March. Okay, so stay tuned, and okay, and we'll see each other. Goodbye, and it's been great having you here. And we will try to later. Okay, we are okay. If you want to make comments in the chat, go ahead. We're opening the chat for greetings and all of that. I would like to thank the 3 interpreters that took turns, Laura, Maria Jose, and Natalia. The 3 of them studied with me, and I'm sure that they did a great job during tonight. Okay, so thanks a lot, and we'll see each other in the next webinar. Thanks a lot.